Between 1987 and 1988, a wave of terror swept through the tranquil streets of Southside, Virginia. Women were brutally strangled in their homes. Their lives violently ended in a place they believed to be safe. Welcome to another true crime story time, where I tell you one true crime case that was solved using forensic science, all while doing, that's right, my makeup. If you are new to this channel, we are very casual over here, so keep it casual and classy. That being said, quick reminder, the comment section is a privilege. Don't fuck it up. I'm not playing with you, okay? No, I'm not playing with you. This all takes place in Arlington, Virginia in November of 1987, where 44-year-old Susan Tucker lived with her husband, Reggie. Susan worked for the United States Forestry Service. She was described as a very soft, kind, compassionate, very sweet person. It was around Thanksgiving, and Susan's husband, Reggie, was on a business trip in Wales. So Susan actually was spending the holiday alone to herself. Oh, of course I would do that. Like, I just washed this. I guess that's what it's for, but I really hate that that's dirty. Now, although Reggie was out of town, the two did keep in regular contact with each other. They were calling each other every day. Now, this is back in the 80s, you guys, which means there was no cell phones back then. So we didn't grow up with having instant contact and communication with people. We actually had to wait. Like, if you just called their house phone, somebody wasn't home and didn't answer the phone, you just had to wait until they got back to you, leave a message. And if they didn't want to ever speak to you again, then they would never get back to you. They would call each other and talk on the phone for an hour or two every single day. This was something that Reggie really made a priority. They loved each other very, very much and couldn't stand being away from each other. Reggie would call Susan every single day until one day Susan just didn't answer. And for the next couple days, his calls would go unanswered. Neighbors became increasingly concerned when they noticed that the Johnsons' bedroom window had been left open for a couple days, and they hadn't seen anyone coming or going from the home in a while. It was the dead of winter, so for a window to be open like that in the dead of winter was just very bizarre, especially for the period of time that there was, and to not see anybody coming in and out of the home. I mean, they just thought it was super suspicious. Thank God for these nosy neighbors. That's all I can say. So on December 1st of 1987, neighbors called police out to do a welfare check on the Tuckers. Upon arrival, authorities found the door ajar. It appeared as though there had been forced entry into the home. They called out to the Tuckers, but no one answered. As they searched the home, they say that the telephone was just ringing and ringing and ringing off the hook, and it just wouldn't stop. I don't know why we say ringing off the hook, because if it's off the hook, then it wouldn't ring. Why they didn't answer the phone when it was ringing, I don't know. Maybe they just thought, like, what's the point? But they didn't answer the phone. Anyway, officers entered the bedroom, and that is when they found Susan Tucker's lifeless body laying face down on her bed. Her hands had been tied behind her back. Her arms and feet were bound. She had a rope around her neck. It appeared as though she had been strangled to death. She was partially clothed, which was an indication that she could have possibly been sexually assaulted. As they continued to search the property, they found drawers open and things flung about throughout the home. There was stuff broken and taken. It was giving very much burglary vibes that had gone really, really wrong. But at the same time, for them to come in with rope like that and to have the time to tie someone up, you would think that that was kind of like premeditated. I mean, the home looked, just to be straight up, ransacked. Authorities contacted Susan's husband, Reggie, to let him know what had happened. And Reggie was beside himself with grief. He was obviously devastated. This is his wife, the love of his life. It was around the holiday season as well, which made it even worse. I can't even imagine something like that happening around the holidays, a time that you would be spending with your loved ones, having your loved one just all of a sudden taken away or murdered like that. Like, it's just, I mean, it was very rough for Reggie. I think it also stung really bad too, because it probably crossed his mind a couple of times, like, what if I had been there? Then this would never have happened to her. It's not his fault, and obviously if he was there, it still may have happened. Like, you just never know these things. But yeah, I felt really bad for Reggie. He now knew the reason why his numerous calls had gone unanswered. Crime scene investigators arrive on the scene. Susan's nightgown, bed sheets, and a sleeping bag that was near her body was all collected and taken in for evidence. They also collected pieces of broken glass from the basement window, which they believed was the point of entry for the assailant. They sent all of this to the forensics lab for testing. Crime scene investigators discovered hairs on the bedding around Susan's body. They also found hairs on the bathroom sink, as well as a face towel that was hanging outside on a clothes rack. Clothes rack, what am I talking about? A clothes line. That is right, you guys. Back in the day, we didn't have things like dryers in our homes. They were at the laundromat. So unless we were super rich, you didn't have anything like a washer or dryer. So we would use clothes lines to actually hang out our clothes to dry. The kids are out of school, y'all. So if you hear screams, hollering, people sounding like they're being strangled in the background, that's the children out of school for summer. Okay? Girl. These kids. The lead investigator analyzed the broken window in the basement, hoping to find traces of the killer's DNA. But the assailant was super careful and had cleaned up behind themselves. They didn't find any finger or footprints. The assailant had been super careful in wiping everything down to make sure that they didn't get caught, which made investigators think that this person was a professional burglar. Why do I say professional? Like, is there a career in burglary? I hope not. It just appeared that this person was most likely a professional. Definitely they were experienced in burglaries. Forensic scientists studied the rope used to tie Susan. They thought that it was something very familiar about the rope. As they continued to analyze, detectives became convinced that they had seen this work before. I am going to go ahead and look like the Cowardly Lion and put more concealer on because I need it. Okay? In an earlier case, about 3 years earlier to be exact, they were investigating a case involving a 34-year-old lawyer named Caroline Hobbs. Caroline had been raped and strangled to death in her own home, which is very consistent with what happened to Susan. Ironically, she lived just 4 blocks away from Susan Tucker's home, and the assailant had entered Caroline's home the same way he had entered Susan's home, through the basement window. He had also tied Caroline up with the same knots as Susan. The ligature marks were also identical. With further investigation, detectives learned that Caroline's case had been closed because a man named David Vasquez had come forward and confessed to her murder. Vasquez was sentenced to 35 years. Now, the lead detective on Susan's case re-interviewed Vasquez and was unsatisfied with his story. He just felt like Vasquez didn't know enough about the murder to have been the murderer. Basically, it felt like Vasquez was a liar and that he was making it up. And I tell you, like, these guys will make up stuff like that. There's many reasons for that. One of them being the fact that they want a lighter sentencing on another crime they had committed. So a lot of times they will admit to a crime they didn't commit so that they get a lower sentencing on a different crime. It's basically like they work alongside the police and help the police out, so the police give them a lighter sentencing. And I think that's what this was about. I put the wrong concealer. Girl, I mixed them up. It's supposed to be tan sand, and I ended up putting medium sand on. This is so much lighter and it's not even my skin tone. About 100 miles away in Richmond, law enforcement was investigating a series of murders similar to Susan Tucker's and Caroline Hobbs. The bodies of 2 other women were found. They had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death. There was also forced entry into their homes as well through some sort of a window. So we know our guy likes windows. Both women were between the ages of 30 and 35 and had been bound with the same rope as the other 2 victims with the same knots. I mean, this dude really, he don't do nothing different. He's still doing the same thing. Detectives had their hands full, but it was about to get even worse because 2 weeks later, a young girl around the age of 15 was also found dead. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled as well. She was found bound, raped, and strangled in her bedroom, and sadly enough, her family had actually been home during the time that all this happened, but they were all asleep, so nobody heard it. The rope and knots used were identical to all the 4 other victims, so it was beginning to look like a pattern. It was evident that this was no accident. The cases were linked, and investigators believe they now had a serial killer on the loose. Fun fact, a novel was written about the murders called Stalking Justice, just in case you guys are like curious and you want to go check it out. It follows the murders and the lead investigator on the case and how he was obsessed with the entire thing. If you guys are interested in that, you can check that out. Just Google search. It's called Stalking Justice. Investigators needed scientific evidence to solve the case, so they turned to forensic experts. Forensic scientists found semen stains on Susan's gown and bedding. When they tested the semen, they found that it came from a person with blood O type and PGM1 enzyme profile. Now, there's only a small percentage of people with this blood type. I believe they said about 13%. However, it did match the semen found at the Caroline Holmes crime scene. I want my brows to be quite wild today because I'm going for this like wet siren mermaid kind of look. Not particularly mermaid, because I feel like mermaid is more like cutesy. It's more like a siren look. They also tested the hairs collected from Susan Tucker's crime scene. They were pubic hairs, not from Susan or her husband Reggie. So who's got pubic hairs is on her blankets? Because that is disgusting. Like straight up disgusting. Well, there was hairs on the blanket, the bathroom sink, and a face towel hanging on a line outside. So what was he doing? Did he take a shower afterwards? That's bizarre. Most hairs can be categorized into 3 hair types: Negroid, Mongoloid, and Caucasian. I'll leave it up to you to decipher which one belongs to which. This helps to tell the race or ethnicity of the person. The test came back positive for Negroid. I just feel so weird saying that. I don't know why. As investigators looked more closely at the case, something else stood out. In Caroline Holmes' file, they found a statement from another woman who had claimed that an African-American male had broken into her home, burglarized it, and then raped her. And get this, you guys, he also entered through, you guessed it, the basement window. This guy got a thing with basement windows, bro, I tell you. Actually, I don't know if it was the basement window. I know it was some window in her home that he entered through. Thankfully, she was able to actually escape and get away from this guy, so she didn't end up being murdered, which is, I mean, thank God. The Arlington and Richmond Police Department did not have enough necessary training to profile a killer, so they reached out to the FBI in Quantico. They met with the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit to get a profile on their killer. The FBI's Behavioral Science Unit basically interviews and research serial killers to better understand why they do what they do, so that they're better able to predict in the future a serial killer, how they're going to move, and how to catch them. And they were able to come up with a profile for their serial killer. Based on the psychological evidence, they believe their killer to be between the ages of 16 and 30, which, if you ask me, that's like a huge hop. That's like a jump, a skip, and a hop. You know, that's a really large age range. They believed him to be a loner type who had mommy issues. I can see that. They theorized that his first experience with crime was most likely arson. According to the experts, studies show that most serial rapists and serial killers start off their killings and their crimes with arson, which I think is pretty dang interesting and very interesting on like a psychological standpoint. Why arson? Detectives believe that he most likely stalked his victims, learned their routines, becoming familiar with their day-to-day life before attacking them. The experts also theorize that he probably lived close by in the area, as most serial killers start off their crimes in an area that is closer to them. I guess they have more confidence because it's comfortable. They said that the perpetrator was a sadist who enjoyed watching his victims be tortured. When he was strangling them, he would sometimes ease the rope around some of his victims' necks so that he could hear them screaming and begging for their lives, because he just was sick like that and he liked to watch people suffer. One victim they found had a shoe impression in her back, which meant that he most likely stood with his foot in her back as he pulled the reins that he had around her neck. Oh, girl, I'm getting freaked out just from even thinking about that. Like, it was clear that he got sexual pleasures from the act. He also masturbated on his victims. Now, it's unclear whether he masturbated before they were dead or after, but either way you look at it, it sounds nuts. At that time, DNA evidence was not that far along. In fact, this would be the first time in history of the United States of America that DNA evidence was used to solve a criminal case. They analyzed the DNA from Susan's nightgown. According to forensic scientists, how DNA evidence works is they isolate the DNA first and then they cut it into smaller pieces. They generate patterns which are then placed onto a piece of X-ray film and it shows up like a picture. Then they're able to compare photographs to see if they match. Problem was, although they had DNA, investigators didn't have a suspect to compare the DNA to. Not only that, it would take up to 10 weeks for them to get the test results back. The lead investigator on the case had a hunch that the killer lived in the Greenville area because this was the area that was closest to all of the women that had been murdered. He drove through the area trying to think of young men that he had come across over the years who might possibly fit that profile. And then a name came to mind: Timothy Spencer. When investigators ran a background check, they discovered that Timothy was no stranger to police. They found a treasure trove of information corroborating the FBI's profile on the killer. For one, Timothy had a long history of burglary. He was very troubled as a teen. He was arrested for arson when he lit his mother's car on fire. Not only that, but he had been arrested just 4 days after Carolyn Helms had been murdered. This guy fits the profile to a T. You can imagine how exciting detectives were. With further investigation, detectives discovered that Timothy was out on probation and was now staying in a halfway house. They were able to secure his records of his comings and goings at the halfway house, and come to find out, he had checked out of the halfway house around Thanksgiving and was staying with his mother in Arlington. Nothing like visiting your mother for the holidays and then going out on just a quick raping spree. Timothy had motive and opportunity to commit these murders. All the circumstantial evidence pointed to him. And on January 20th, 1998, he was arrested. Samples of his DNA was collected as well as his clothing. Forensic scientists found glass fragments on Timothy's clothing. They compared the fragments found on his clothes to the glass found in each of the victims' homes, hoping to find some evidence that would tie him to the crime scene, at least one of the crime scenes. To compare the glass, they used a technique called glass refraction analysis. Now, the refractive index, or RI as they would call it, describes how light passes through glass. The reflective index of a glass fragment can be compared to the RI of another glass fragment to determine if they came from the same source. Reflective index is measured by using immersion methods or automated methods. The results came back and the glass fragments matched the broken glass found in Susan Tucker's home. The semen found in Susan Tucker's home matched the semen found in all of the other crime scenes, just as the FBI had predicted. Timothy was responsible for all 5 of the murders. And lastly, Timothy's DNA matched the DNA found at the crime scene. Scientific evidence that Timothy was in fact, without a doubt, the one and only killer. I'm starting to sweat, so like the powder products is starting to stick very bizarrely. Y'all, let's get creative. I'm feeling like that teacher from the magic school bus, you know? Let's get creative, let's get busy, let's get messy, let's make mistakes. Does anybody remember the teacher from the magic school bus name? Like, I'm drawing a blank right now and I cannot remember her name and I can't believe that. Guys, does that even make sense? I feel like, should we keep it or should I take it off? Does that make is that like making things worse? What do you guys think? I feel like this would look better with a neutral eye. Adjust the pop of color under the brow, so I am going to remove that because I am not feeling it, girl. Thanks to forensic science and some great police work, in July of 1988, Timothy Spencer was convicted of rape and capital murder. He was sentenced to death. What did you guys think about this case and my makeup look? Please let me know in the comments down below. If you like videos like these, you can check out some of my other videos. I'll leave them linked on the screen right here. Like, comment, subscribe, and share all of the great YouTube things that you guys already know to do. And I'll see you guys next time with another true crime story time. Bye.